oh,
Apologies. Can you repeat? I really sorry.
okay, got it. So I really I watched everything. I read everything that you sent to me, and I did a bit of research myself, but I really could not understand how it took place. Um, because so there's always censorship, and there's always traces of censorship. So these traces are usually also scraped off the of pages. For instance, I once I said that you would the Belge would not just kill and dismember Patrice Lumumba, they would also dissolve him in acid, so there would be no trace of him. But when you write about it, you would just retrace the fact of erasure in a sense. And so what really happened? I mean, like facts. Give us what kind of what how it happened, how did they censor you, how did they make you? And because really do not agree with the term erasure, because it's not really erasure, it's something else for me. But I really want to know how they approached you, how it began, and how it led to something that was very much against what you had in mind, which was the basis, which was the core idea of the installation, of your multifaceted spider, so to speak. And so, what really happened?
I mean, it's very hard to summarize it because it was a 2-year process, but just to a very brief timeline, very close to the opening. Any Venice exhibition has very tight, very strict timelines of what you submit. In January, we had the deadline of submitting all the elements, all the works for the pavilion, which we did. On February 10th, we had the deadline of submitting everything. Everything had to be finalized for the catalog of the exhibition, which we did with one of the participants being Àngels, who wrote the text about my work particularly. In end of the March was supposed to be the transportation of the work. 15th or 12th of March, these images of the lower belts and the upper belts went to print. And on a few days after that, I learned that they had contacted the print house and they stopped. They asked them not to print the images.
Who's they?
They is the commissioner, but because Estonian commissioner of the Estonian pavilion, but because the curator had asked her to do so. And it was the curator who had asked her to do so. And the reason behind it was that the first email I received was that the images are cultural appropriation for me to talk about Indonesians. So the images that have Indonesian people on them should be removed and the landscapes are okay. I argued that in my opinion, it's not cultural appropriation if I'm not talking about anyone's culture. So what I'm talking about, the destruction of landscape, the commodifying land and labor, it has nothing to do with culture. It's a very universal concept. It's happening everywhere. Me, particularly being from Iran, our history is very much tied with resources. And this is use of resources. This is all happening because of local resources of that particular geographical location. So for me, there is a lot of connection, and definitely it's not culture. So talking about it is not culture. The next reason that was brought in the next email was that my sculpture is aggressive towards the people who are on the images, because the images, these people are pressed between the rollers, and this is offensive. What I'm doing to these people, this is aggression. This gives the wrong image, the wrong message, and this is not the message we want to give with this exhibition. Yeah, that was the next reason why they should be removed. And this is for me even more absurd because, first of all, the images of the upper belt, if you notice from the sculpture, are the ones that are kind of pressed between the two wooden rollers in the original sculpture. And in the down part, actually, you have these smaller rollers, and the images mostly go over them. They're not really pressed. But also, I'm saying that this is symbolically a print machine. The principle of printing, any print machine, functions on the principle of pressing. So in that case, any printing machine is aggressive towards the image they print. But anyhow, this was all the conversation I had. And to be honest, this wasn't the only thing that they wanted to remove from the exhibition. If any of you saw the exhibition, there was also a platform, kind of architectural element in the exhibition. Later, it turned out when the curator saw that piece for the first time, because, you know, there were pieces that with the exhibition of 15,000, with the budget of 15,000 that the exhibition had for my work, they couldn't be produced beforehand. So the curator, of course, sees a site-specific work first time in the pavilion. And then also it was sold that I used the element I used for the surface of the work, which is teak veneer, is also unethical and it has to be removed. So the problem, the reason why I couldn't negotiate, why I couldn't continue this argument was that, to be honest, I was extremely sick. It wasn't only one thing to fight for. There were so many things I had to defend suddenly in April, whereas all these materials were submitted already in February, in March, and then after that, the catalog was ready. Everything was there. I mean, only a person who hadn't checked, who hadn't read, who hadn't followed what we were doing with Mr. This is simply what happened in practice.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Why do you think the timing of this was in that specific time? Because you submitted the pictures, they knew already what is going to be printed. Why was the timing so? Because I think it wasn't just random timing.
Why the issue was brought then?
Why that? Because you submitted already before, a few months before.
They already knew.
They already knew that they were doing it. So why did they specifically do that in that time?
In March, you mean?
Yeah.
Because they went through all the images finally. Because nobody had time to. We had a common drive. We had a common online drive. All the materials were there, and I started adding them actually with the curator herself in January. And some of the images were suggested by herself, and some of those images also have people on them. So I think it was just, in my opinion, personally, it was just being worried, being afraid of criticism. That this exhibition was so big for them. This one-time opportunity was so huge for them. They were so worried about this image. They are creating this image of Estonian art scene in this. And what I was hearing all the time was that we will be criticized for this. We will be criticized for using teak because it's unethical. You know, we all know how Venice works, that so often one article that starts circulating about the whole biennial is about whatever scandal this pavilion brought in, huge boats or ships, so that becomes the topic of Venice. I think they were mostly worried that this becomes not the thing that we would be famous for. We brought teak to this pavilion. So I have a contract that I showed her. So on February, in the middle of April, already a week to the exhibition, I received a contract that they asked me to sign, and that contract said, nowhere in the pavilion of Estonia, teak must be used.
And were they also afraid of the
What
reaction?
What cannot be used? Sorry.
The material wood teak, which I had used on my.
Were they also afraid of the reaction of Dutch people or from the Monorail Fund, or was that also an argument? Or
I don't think so. That's what everyone thinks, but I really don't think so. But also, I think it's a bit like, you know, you have to talk about things. You can't criticize things. You have to, but then it has to be in a certain way, always, you know? Talk about it, but not like that. Like this, in a polite way, in a, you know, standard way that we define. This was my opinion. I don't think there was so much worry about, because everyone asks me, the first question people ask me is that, was it because it was a Dutch pavilion? And it was like a favor to them, so they didn't want to be kind of disrespectful or not, they wanted to be grateful, but I really don't think that was the issue, in my opinion.
Well, I'm always suspicious about the timing of censorship.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
not only
in this case, practically it was impossible to, you know, the prints didn't reach the exhibition, and then so that was exactly the thing. And then they said that, okay, they will make it, they will add it. So you're right. I mean, this timing was important in a very practical way.
yeah, because it doesn't give you time to actually
recover from.
yeah, or
think about
reflect on it,
alternatives,
yeah.
To react in any meaningful way.
Mm.
So, I guess.
But shall we, Barbad, did I answer your question? Shall we go on with?
Yeah, definitely you did. But the thing is that how I see it is, or perhaps I should keep it so that everyone else would speak as well, so that just get back to me later. I think that would be more humane.
If you could remember your points, yeah. Yeah.
Ola bad sabit mirasam. Okay.
Okay, so then, I mean, I think that I'm gonna just keep going on this point of the censorship, the timing, because even after, as you mentioned, there was still the hope that maybe they would replace the blank belts with the belts that with the printed images. And there was this focus in the video against using the word censored. So then, yeah, one of the reasons I invited Brenda for the article that you wrote, the review in De Groene Amsterdammer. And I noticed that in that article, in the subtitle, it says censored. So this word actually featured quite prominently in the article in some way. So I wanted to ask you about how you encountered the pavilion, what made you notice that something was awry, and what prompted you to write the article?
Tiny question. So yeah, maybe it's good to know that when I arrived at the little pavilion, I wasn't looking for a story about Bita. I was looking for a sort of theory that I had that this invitation from the Dutch to Estonia was a ridiculous invitation. So that was my like the invitation of the Dutch to invite Estonia into the pavilion was a bit of in my opinion, ridiculous invitation. So that was the perspective that I had when I arrived at the pavilion. And I was looking for a sort of evidence in the space that would back up my theory. And then I saw, yeah, of course I saw the work, Bita's work, and then the other work in the exhibition. And I don't necessarily have a lot of experience with like stories of censorship and stuff, but I do have a bit of experience with curatorial conflict and also with sculpture or like assessing if a sculpture, yeah. So for me, the first impression that I had when I arrived was that there was some kind of placeholder situation. So I immediately saw that there was something like super strange about this sculpture, like, because if it was about the mechanism only, then then to me it felt like it would have had a different title. It would have been displayed in a different way. Like it just didn't add up. And Also in comparison to the curatorial statement about this orchid delirium and all these narratives that were constructed, and also the wall text and like the work. I'm happy that you say it. Now I hear it for the first time in the video that you say that the work doesn't make any sense without the images, because yeah, completely honest, that was my impression of the work when I arrived. Like, this work does not make any sense. Because yeah, it just didn't feel like a complete story. And then so that was what I left the pavilion with, and then I looked on Bita's website, and then there was this banner saying, yeah, this work is censored, and yeah, so then it kind of clicked together with my own impression of the exhibition, and then I started researching, and yeah. Then the article came out, and then I first published it myself, and then Roos van der Lind from Groene Amsterdam, she asked me to publish it. Does that answer all the points, or did I miss one?
Yeah,
May I just, why did you think it was a ridiculous thing that they invited in Estonia?
Yeah, I think we will get to that eventually, but
Just give us a little bit.
I understand sort of gesture that you feel like maybe you're taking up a bit much space as a nation, and yeah, as a gesture, I can imagine that it's sort of nice to give that space to another nation that had maybe less opportunities or whatever narrative there were for this choice. But then, yeah, and I can even understand that you choose to sort of withdraw from any sort of communication, because it was really like, I believe it was really like that, right? That they just, you have the space and we have nothing to do with it anymore. It's really up to you to do whatever you want. And I think that choice was maybe from a sort of idea of artistic freedom, right? That the artistic freedom is there as long as you don't interfere in any on the level of content. But then, yeah, then some yeah, if artists show up and they have a narrative about something that implies you as a country, then I think that position is a bit difficult to uphold, right? That you're not implied in the conversation.
But you found it also on beforehand, you found it like a ridiculous choice.
Yeah, immediately.
Is it also because the choice was Estonia, or in general?
Well, the choice for Estonia was a bit was interesting to me as well, because it was so sort of arbitrary. Like, it felt like it could have been any. I'm sorry, I'm known for being quite blunt. So if, yeah, it almost like you can choose any country that is less privileged, and then it wouldn't fit into the narrative.
Is there any motivation for Estonia?
I could not find any. The only thing that I could find was that they said in the statements, they said like Estonia has a very interesting contemporary art scene, maybe similar to the Netherlands. That was also a bit like. So yeah, there could be an interesting exchange there. I think that was the idea. Yeah.
What I know from the Estonian side was that, if I understood right, Estonia wasn't the first choice. They weren't the first country that was asked. I don't know what were the other choices, but it always came to my mind, why didn't they ask Indonesia in the first place to also yeah, and during like working on the exhibition, it was for me very strange that, I mean, if you want me not to talk about Indonesians, why didn't we invite in the first place an Indonesian artist to the group? But yeah, all I know is that Estonia wasn't really the first choice. They asked apparently some other countries, and then there was a phone call to the Estonian commissioner, and they were told that they had followed the exhibitions of Estonian Pavilion, and they thought that they were always very interesting.
But whose question was it to like make a link between Estonia and the Netherlands?
Whose question?
I mean, you said, yeah, there was like the question to make it work about like.
No, there was no question. We just proposed.
Oh, you just propose, oh, I think
This
it was something
topic,
that
we
the
thought that
Dutch
actually it
wanted.
totally makes sense because of the venue and because of all this.
I
Like,
said there wasn't like a kind of request or.
no, we just thought about the venue and we thought about, we thought that this really fits well.
I have a question actually for example, what we just said. I'm curious, what was the bargain in this transgression that happened between your work and institutional politics? Because it must have been also a certain kind of a bargain that was negotiated within this political strategy that happened, like besides just like fear of being cancelled on some level. So was there any kind of additional value that was created in return for canceling, not canceling, censoring your work? Is that's maybe some kind of deal prospect that
The deal was that I will not touch my other works.
right. No, but not just from your perspective, I'm asking from an institutional perspective. Like
do
in
you
terms of like I might have thought like recently the actually the previous commissioner, so I know actually personally who you're talking about, but I'm curious like on an institutional level, like was there any kind of bargain between Estonia and Netherlands that kind of like paved to this kind of censorship? But there's some like.
I don't think there was any connection between Estonia and the Netherlands. Even the events that were organized, for example, to announce that Estonia will get the pavilion, this official event that you were part of it had nothing to do with the artists. It had nothing to do with so we weren't even mentioned in it. So we were there, but there were all these official people handing the
Exactly, that's the bargain.
exactly. So it was a show. It was a huge show of people from cultural ministries and whatever. And during the entire event took some hours and many officials and politicians and whatever, the artists weren't even mentioned once. So it was this very kind of high-end event all about two nations relation and this amazing collaboration and whatever, and we were just in the audience.
And also giving the key, right?
The key and the model of the pavilion was handed officially, and that was the only time that someone said maybe the artist can also come and receive them. Because actually I was the one that needed that model the most, because I was doing site-specific works that really needed to have the model. So yeah, that was the 2 seconds that I was asked to go on the stage and receive the model next to the commissioner and the curator and the other guys. But yeah, always, I think until maybe, when was that event? It was in November. So until the end of 2021, there was no mention of the works, the artists, and nothing. It was all about these two countries and two nations doing exchange. And
There was an exchange program also between, I'm not sure who went, but I do remember that there was organized by the Union.
Yeah, that's the part I was as a member of the press, so as a journalist, working with journalists, and there were curators from the Netherlands who were visiting, and also exchange. There were also Estonian people coming to the Netherlands afterwards. So
And I have one.
also. Okay.
But there was some kind of infrastructural relief, that's the thing, like, because, and you were like the collateral in that process. So this was the bargain, like, so like, this is what I was asking earlier, what was the bargain of putting you under the bus, because that's something definitely, was exchanged in that process of also your censorship, and, there was some asset that was at stake, and it wasn't just the reputation of the nation, but there was also some kind of combination, some kind of that was probably being done, that was beyond just your art, I guess, I mean, I presume it's very obvious as well, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I can also ask this question because I think in your article, it's arguing that actually the Netherlands had too much of a hands-off approach. So in that case, I mean, they just wanted to give the key, and leave, and let be whatever. So what do you think should have happened in this circumstance?
I actually like what they used in the article as in like the nation Airbnb that just
Yeah.
gives you the key and then comes back to see if everything is in
It's
place.
not broken, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a lot is broken, but they didn't notice, right? Yeah. So I thought about this question a lot, actually. I still don't really know how to answer, but maybe we can come up with an answer together. But so I don't really think that because in your preparation it said the question said, do you think that the Netherlands could have maybe prevented the situation or that it could have solved it? And I think this is actually really interesting because yeah. The Netherlands, especially like the cultural institutions in the Netherlands, they usually feel like they can solve a lot, right? But then, yeah, there's also a lot of history that proves us wrong. So no, I don't think they could have solved it or they could have avoided it. But what I can even understand this position of not wanting to interfere with the artistic, whatever comes into the pavilion. Yeah, you want a hands-on approach. Maybe I can even understand, and I can also understand that you don't recognize immediately when something like this happens, because I didn't recognize it. Of course, I did not walk into the pavilion and see, hey, this work is censored, or like that's not the first impression that you have. So I can imagine that you sort of miss the point. What I don't understand is when someone writes an article about it, who has, by the way, been advising in your organization for 4 years, still does not trigger you to respond. That part I don't really understand.
You mean that Mondrian didn't respond to the article?
Yeah, and not just Mondrian, like no one responded to the article.
Estonians, they did react.
The Estonians reacted quite.
I mean,
aggressive.
yeah, because it says now that some things have been changed.
Yeah,
On the online version.
yeah, it says, yeah, they were quite bad. Which I can also imagine.
Yeah.
But to this day, they still have to give me arguments why the article is actually wrong. So until they do, I'm quite sure that nothing's really wrong.
But just to mention that you said that they might not have noticed, but the director of Mondrian was there next to my work, and I gave a presentation myself to him. So
yeah, but still,
he couldn't possibly have noticed because I thought
I can imagine that your naivety may sort of stop you from realizing that you're kind of implied in the story, as even if you're the director.
Yeah. So I also thought about it a lot. I don't think in any way they could interfere or they could control the content and the process, because that also would have been extremely wrong. But what I thought recently when we discussed this was that if I understood right, Mondrian to some extent controls or supervises some things, such as artist pay. So at least they could ask if your artists were paid, from the Estonian pavilion. At least they could ask how much you paid for 2 years of work and all these questions. How was the working condition? How was the, because that's a very symbolic one. This censorship, the censor can be defined with different words and whatever, but that money amount, that's a very fixed number. So they could at least be curious about that.
Yeah, but I think they were mainly curious about their image and how, like, what this would change if they would extend an invitation like this to Estonia, and then in their eyes, yeah, everything worked out well, because it was not. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think they were that concerned with what would come out, right? That was not part of their invitation. Their invitation was to just do something, and then whatever would happen is kind of up to you. Which, yeah,
Now, I have another question, if I may, because I'm very curious. And I think we spoke about it a little bit, Bita, but how was the process of selection? Like how were you selected? Proposal. Okay. So you proposed this work.
I didn't. I was invited to join the group that was working on this proposal. And to be frank with you, I think the reason I was included was that the other artist had already represented Estonia before. So she couldn't possibly do a solo show. And I was the best option because I was the most exhibited artist in Estonia back then, in 2019, for example. And I would have been the first foreigner ever representing Estonia. So it was great for the image of the pavilion.
I have another question. It's all like very sensational and mysterious, and it just it feels like the perfect ground for a conspiracy. And I'm just wondering if anyone has a conspiracy theory. You don't have to. You don't have to respond if it's too much. But yeah, I'm just curious about conspiracy theories.
You can imagine that I've spent so much time thinking about this. So.
Yeah, I haven't going whatever. I've already got
Yeah, I didn't have to. I mean, the only thing that always comes up is this relation, like between the two countries and a favor that should have been returned. But to be honest, I have sort of all possible.
Nothing like geopolitics.
Where are the images from?
Which the archival images, they're from different museums in the Netherlands, plus the Literature Museum in Estonia. So most of them are from Dutch archives. All of them over 100 years old. So the copyright is not an issue, but this was the thing that apparently the Estonian Center has answered to all the journalists that who were contacted by that the issue was actually copyright, that she didn't have the copyright for the images, but that cannot be the case because the images are old. And I actually paid to buy the high resolution images from this museum, so they all
From Rotterdam also, right?
from Rotterdam.
Yeah, you said that.
Photo museum.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Some of them. I didn't know it's Rotterdam.
So they are actually exhibited already
Well, in collections.
in collections. Yeah.
Archives,
No.
of museums, yeah, but they're nothing that anyone can France actually, and I spent 1 year to dig into their online archives, and then their low resolution, you have to, they scan them for me.
And there was in the exhibition was also documental
Exactly.
material, right?
Exactly.
So that's, I mean, there was
Exactly.
this.
So
these
that's
images
the-
from there.
That's exactly the biggest question for me, that's why it was okay in vitrines, but it wasn't okay on a sculpture.
And also her text was on censored.
Yeah.
Well,
That- Yeah, I mean, this was also kind of what was surprising to me. So, I mean, from my experience, because I wrote the text. So I actually printed, you can take a look later, a few pages from the catalog that was never printed. But I submitted the text in February when all the information had to be in. So it has to go through all the process of editing. Actually, it wasn't translated, but they needed it then. So my text included a description of the images that I had seen, that Bita had sent me, that was there. So you can actually take a look and see that my writing and the description of the images is in the design next to an image of the blank belts. So the text and image don't match. So yeah, and this is also the timing. I mean, at that point, I guess there was still the intention of printing the images, and something afterwards happened and they forgot to go back and censor my text, so.
Yeah, perhaps it's also good to add that their statement on what happened was that, well, because you shared a lot of documents with me, right? And from those documents, what I got, it was that their argument was that it's not there because you did not respond to their questions, right? So for them, it was not a statement not to do it. It was, they say that the images were not there because
I didn't answer to the, I didn't
because it
continue
was unclear when
answering
you
those
were
emails,
coming- yeah.
so So the chain of emails in March that was already mid-March, and there were these reasons one after another why the images cannot be there. I didn't continue responding to them.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I can stay on the topic of the images because, well, the ecological destruction, the deforestation that was happening there is relevant to Lieneke's research. And I was hoping that here you could tell us a little bit about the context of the exhibition in the winter, but also how you first encountered Bita's work and how the context, I mean, of being exhibited here in the Netherlands also changes the interpretation.
Yeah, I first saw the work also at the Venice Biennale, but then I didn't get the work, or I was more like that it was about the flowers in a way, but also when you are at the Venice Biennale, you see so many artworks. So I was also not like have this big attention for it maybe, but I saw it then for the first time, and then I was making this exhibition in Deventer, Moeders van het Land, about farmland in the Netherlands, and also like all the power structures that plays in the landscape of the Netherlands, and because it's quite topic nowadays. And then I invited some artists. One artist was making a work about the area around Deventer, but also one about Zeeland or about Friesland, so different parts of the Netherlands. And then I read your article in Groene Amsterdam, and then this whole work makes total sense. And also your website, Bita, is really nice because you really see the new work. So that was where I saw this new work. And then I was thinking like, yeah, when I want to talk about power structures in the farmlands, then I need to talk about Indonesia. So it was really because of this ecological topic that I choose Bita's work.
Yeah, I think
and not about, maybe not totally about the erased images or about this whole story, but it was really about what the work itself can say, and yeah, the power of the work itself.
And I was super happy because I thought it totally made sense, you know, that because this work became so much about the censorship of the work. So I was super happy that finally it's gaining independence from the whole story.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, one thing that in the context of that exhibition.
Yeah, I'm just waving all the time. So I would rather say that the work was no, to say that let's start with saying that this orchid delirium is somewhat, at least in my eye, is a descendant of the Dutch tulip fever, which was very probably the first bubble in economy. So it's very much related, if it's not related to the actual Dutch state or government, but culturally, I think it's deeply rooted. And but what happened, and why I really insisted on not calling it erasure, and I think Bita's work was dismembered. The topology of art is, let's say, that the profane and the archive. So you started to dig into the archives and then brought things out which were not on view, which were of course accessible. They were not barred, you know, as they bar things in Iran, for instance. You do not access to things, you know, you cannot go into the public library and ask to scan certain things. For instance, leftist newspapers of 8 years ago, you cannot do that. So, being censored, I'm not saying that it turned out to be some kind of an added value, but it tended to be the profane. profane in its true etymological sense, which is as in terms of being before or being in front of the temple. So this temple, the so-called Venice Biennale, which Ehsan, my very good friend and colleague here, has attacked beautifully years ago when I first visited the Biennale, is of course a temple. Sometimes they call it the Olympics of arts and so on. And so it is the temple. So what goes there topologically is the archive. And what is not there, what opposes is the profane. And this is exactly what happens in censorship. And when it comes to colonialism, the very what is something that is very, very similar to what happened to Bita's work is what happens in Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. And the state of Mansfield Park, owned by Sir Thomas Bertram, is of course funded and raised and flourished, and then it all goes to he gains money from the Antigua, right? So he has plantations there. And what Edward Said says about it is of course debatable, and many have contested, but he calls it aesthetic silence. So this is another. It's some sort of censorship, which I really do not want to call it censorship. You just remain silent about it. For instance, we all talk about slavery in different kinds in colonies and all that. No one talks about slavery in Islam, for instance. They remain silent about it. Of course, it is allowed. Of course, there's nothing wrong with it. But they stay silent about it. So we stay silent about certain things that they should remain in the archives and never become profane. So what happened here throughout the whole process has nothing to do with aesthetics, only when it's about distribution, which is one of the core aspects of the work, of Bita's work, I mean. But it transforms the poetics of the work in the sense that, in the true etymological sense of poetics, which is making, creating. So it deforms and dismembers it. So this is when I come in awe and do not understand why would one think to show that this dismembered work of art, just to, if the intention is to reveal this hideous process of erasure, dismemberment, and so on, I'm okay with it. But for instance, I saw a version of it here in Paris. It had nothing to do with what I saw on Bita's website. It was totally a different thing. So I really want to know that do you really think that you could have? Why didn't you cancel the whole pavilion? Why not really stand up to it and say no? Because for instance, we are talking about it now in Amsterdam, and me being a suburb of Paris. I'm not in Paris anyhow. But so because it's eventful, because censorship has become eventful in some minds, that in certain countries censorship is a matter of rarity. So that's why someone from the public, I cannot say them, asked if there's conspiracy theory behind it, who was involved and all that. So in countries like Iran, you really don't ask that. Censorship is one of the molecules in the air that you breathe every second. So you don't question it. You know it by heart. You're born with it, in it, into it, and you live with it. And it's your choice to fight against it or whatsoever. But why did you decide to show it as dismembered as it was?
I didn't. I withdrew from the exhibition. The cultural minister was involved personally. We sent last-minute emails the days before the exhibition. I agreed that I allowed the exhibition to be opened because I just learned from a lawyer that me, as the author of the work, have the right to not to that they can only show it when I announce it complete, which is something I of course knew, but just to know the legal terms gave me basically the courage to write this email. I withdrew from the exhibition and I said that all of my works have to be withdrawn. The last email I received back from them, which is what I shared with you, was that the Estonian Center for Contemporary Art stands with artistic integrity. They will realize my work and they will not interfere with any of this. And behind that, there was the promise that now the print will not arrive for the opening, but they will replace the belts with the printed belts. In meanwhile, my condition was that there should be information in the pavilion. All the audience members should be informed that the images are missing, which never happened, apparently, according to people who visited the pavilion. And after that,
eventually you couldn't convince them to put that on the website, for instance, because I visited the website of the Biennale and it's you know, it's beautiful. It's a work about science, colonialism, and you know, all that, and then so you see nothing. This is what I say about, you know, removing the traces of the censored work of erasure.
They changed the exhibition handouts. And they mentioned this information and some other information that was later changed again. But if I understood right, a week after that, again, they changed the exhibition handout to another.
Okay.
And I wasn't even allowed to visit the exhibition anymore because my pass to the exhibition was only issued for 5 days. So I couldn't enter the space anymore. I also never received the documentation of my own work. So I do not have the documentation. What I have, what is on my website, is taken by friends and family and partner. So there's also this emotional thing. Yeah, I kind of, the day I received the work back, it was so, it was such an important work for me because it arrived in another museum that later showed it. They showed it, and it was just after 8 months to see the work again. It was such a special moment.
So just to conclude this, I would just add something. Why I mentioned Mansfield Park by Jane Austen was this beautiful idea of which is I think it's a very powerful idea that it's very much against the biblical understanding of one's household. It's that the importance of an empire to the situation at home, not vice versa. So you would not start with getting your home in order, then go and cure the empire. You know, you have to understand the importance of the empire in your home, and understand that the Mansfield Park is built on the shoulders of slaves, and the word slavery, I think, is mentioned only once in the novel, although it's a magnificent novel, but it's just not there. So by dismembering, I meant that it's what happened to you. It's rather oblivion. It's more than, it's not erasure. It's oblivion, as if the context was never there. What they took out was the context, was the human context of what was happening. It's like seeing the golden age of the Dutch golden age, and seeing just like the older character, which I really admire, and we went there with their son, and so it's seeing the all that beauty, and without understanding on whose shoulders those were built. So, and with saying that, you know, of course, there's a mea culpa among many colonialists, but the thing is, you cannot really say that because um, as if that you would reproduce it. So saying that with reenacting the act of reprinting, you are oppressing these people. You have to, you know, etymologically correct everything, because press comes from, you know, compressing and pressing and all that. It has not an oppression and all that. It does. It's a physical thing. I mean, so in a sense, when you hug someone, you're also pressing someone. So it's a crazy thing to say. And knowledge and reprinting and printing, and the whole idea was based on the idea. It's a humanist idea of of um, of sharing, of recreating, of making things public, not just private. You know, because knowledge was once very, you know, with scriveners and people like that used to copy books. So it's a mockery, it's a sham with what happened, and it's out of a Monty Python thing, I think, what happened to you.
You asked about someone from the model to come here.
The invitation was shared. I shared the invitation.
Yeah, but you didn't personally say that to Elke van der Weningen. You signed it. You did it. And? No response. It was no response. But I was directly. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. But you didn't even say no, thank you. And
She has unblocked me from it.
because she's been abstract.
Yeah. But that was a very insightful also segue into cultural imperialism, Saeed chapter 2. And maybe then I would love to come back to these images. Maybe we can do this after Barbad speaks, and yeah, because yeah, I think that's a nice way to go into also Ehsan's project. And what I wanted to ask, when you put also this layer on top of everything that happened of the immigrant artist. And so in a previous edition of the Venice Biennale, Ehsan was making the anonymous stateless immigrants pavilion, which is a conceptual piece, if I can describe it that way. It's an imaginary pavilion. And so I wanted to ask you also about maybe the structures of power, the idea of borders that are within the structure of Venice, and how all of that also is, I mean, how do you see basically what happened to Bita's work?
I was actually thinking in a way, they kind of completed Bita's work. Because then in another level, because then the work is not representational anymore, but it's actually revealing. It's almost like it becomes almost like a performance or a kind of an event that actually shows the erasure of background back then, what the artist was doing. Then it becomes erasure of the images, erasure of the artist, erasure of the work. And it becomes an event already by itself that actually shows how back then was the erasure or censorship, and also erasure of those landscape was working and how it was working now. So then to relate it somehow, I don't know, but for me, it's also this idea of who actually can show in Venice Biennale through the whole procedure. You must be a documented person, and you cannot be in the opposition to the government, because then an artist must go through the whole procedure of submitting and being identified through the Ministry of Culture and all of that. So then basically there are a lot of voices that are excluded from the process of selecting an artist. So then, in that time, I was living with some people that didn't have documents or or didn't have proper visa to travel. So then we had these conversations exactly about who is selected and with what kind of privileges are those artists selected. And from there came this idea of a pavilion that is actually for undocumented artists. But then the question was how to realize this, how to make this pavilion exist, and what would it do even if it exists to the whole concept of inclusive cultural scene. Because then it would be like, again, like, oh, now we will have another pavilion that includes the undocumented people, so see how great we are, right? So then, also then thinking about this, I don't know what one of you mentioned, this boat that was presented, that was actually taken from the Mediterranean. And that for me is such a ridiculous piece because, but it's also again revealing how the politics work, the politics of Erasure, because nobody talks about who was actually in this boat. Whereas with that money, actually they could easily find out who were in these boats, what humans were there, and what happened that we lost them. But then it's diverting the conversation around something else, right? So then the idea of realizing this pavilion become already itself a question. So then the idea was actually to express more the non-existence of something than realizing its existence. So it became a series of stencils with the arrow that some other pavilions that are not in Giardini actually use to direct the public. But then it was more like a kind of a graffiti with the spray that it's. But then it would direct you to different streets, and in the end you would get lost and never find it. And yeah, there were many people asking, emailing us about, does it really exist? Where is it? We want to write a review about it.
I got lost because of you. You know, back then I didn't know Ehsan at all, and I went to the Biennale. You know, it's not my thing. I was in Italy, and so I saw the stencils, and I really followed those arrows, and I really got lost. So I saw nearly nothing. So it's because of, and no, it's not just because of that. I'm joking. I fell in love with Schliegensif, and I spent 2 days there, and the rest was dedicated to Ehsan's arrows. And so I was really looking for this stateless pavilion, which was non-existent. And later on, I mean, some years later, in a panel in Amsterdam, when we had a panel together, I realized that it was Ehsan's fault. And so so this was one of the best things I saw in the Venice Biennale, because as Ehsan described it, you have to be very privileged. You have to be in the archives. You have to embrace the temple, again, about not being profane in its contemporary sense. And so yeah, there's that.
And the funny thing is that, you know, some of the graffitis were removed, but some of them they stayed for many years there. They didn't remove it. I think some people kind of liked it. I don't know what they liked about it, but they liked it. So, but then some other things that we thought strategically that if we write it and it would be censored, then it will get more attention. It didn't work out that way. Because then in that year was the whole thing about Bradley Manning and WikiLeaks. And of course, the American Pavilion didn't mention any of that. There was no talks about it. So that's why I was saying, like, the artist needs to be part of the status quo, willing to exhibit in those places. So what we did is that we, one night we broke into Giardini and we went on top of the American Pavilion, and there are light bulb, like, how do you call it, like glasses on the rooftop where the natural light comes in. And there we wrote Free Bradley Manning. And one could just see it from the glass, and even if you don't see it, when the light was coming, you will see the shadow of the graffiti on, as the light moves, you will see it on the floor, and then it will go on the walls. So as we did it at night, in the morning we came thinking, we were the first one thinking that they're gonna remove it, or the American Pavilion would close. And this would be a reason why this piece will get attention, or at least the slogan will get attention, or at least there would be something about Bradley Manning and WikiLeaks and all of this. But nothing happened. Nothing. Business as usual. People go in, go out, nothing.
No one saw it.
I was just hanging out there, and people would just look at it and just walk on.
But even people who were from the movie.
Cannot assume that they didn't see it, because you could see the shadow of it falling on the floor.
But this is also what's right, it's like not mentioning it. And if you don't mention it, it doesn't exist, right? So
Yeah. It's exactly the economy of attention, right? That also is a subtle way of actually censorship, to what you give attention to, what you don't spend any attention, and therefore nobody knows anything about.
So should we introduce Barbad so that we can speak about this project a bit?
I just, when you were spending about the attention, I realized that you mentioned the image, the archival images in the vitrines in the pavilion. I think that actually we are so used to seeing these images in that format.
Then it's allowed.
Then it's allowed, and then actually it doesn't get so much attention. As soon as you put it on these moving belts, and yeah. Because most people just, definitely in that context, that fast forward, that passive, when it's exhibition with that amount of work, nobody would pay attention to images in vitrines in the pavilion, of course. But the moving sculpture definitely attracts anyone from kids to.
I think about the graffiti as well, and people are so used to seeing that graffiti, especially Americans, so they've already seen it on every wall, but yeah, it becomes so sort of anonymous as well. Not to knock down what we did, it's great, it's very cool. But yeah, just the mundanity that, like, the act of protest becomes so green, just the.
You're saying about the American Pavilion?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know, because I don't think it was normalized. I think they had a strategy of how to respond.
Yeah.
Because in American Pavilion you don't see graphics. Like in the whole Giardini, you don't see graphics. And the city of Venice doesn't tolerate graffiti either. It's usually cleaned right away. Either by water spray, or they just paint over the households. But the fact that they didn't clean Free Bradley Manning, I assume they had a conversation about it. And I don't know how quickly they actually decide to not respond. But I thought it was a very smart response of just not responding and ignoring the whole thing.
I also have to mention that about not responding, I know personally several journalists who contacted the Estonian Contemporary Center, and they never responded to the questions of so there were several other attempts to write about this whole issue, and there's always the matter of, the journalists have the obligation of hearing the other side and having the other side of the story. And especially in the opening week, 2 or 3 journalists asked for their comments and they never responded. And then another journalist was apparently, she sent me at least 5 emails from the curator who had told her that she will respond next week, and she's on holidays now, she's resting for minutes. And at the end, the last email was that there's already a lot published about the pavilion, that she doesn't think that she has more to provide. Yeah, that I think, one strategy is always like ignoring, not responding, and not which is what you said, Barbad, about it's one type of censorship, silence, not speaking about it. So we're going a bit back and forth, but my idea was also to, when you introduce everyone, to say why they're involved here, why they're invited. I think for some of the speakers we skipped that, but the reason I invited Barbad was because as a member of a collective, Iranian collective called Art Culture Action, Barbad has recently worked on documenting the state censorship in Iran. And I thought that it's very interesting for me to hear his point of view dealing with the subject in a country that, as he described himself, maybe the relation, people's relation, artists' relation with censorship is built differently in the way you encounter it, you kind of live it every day. And I have to say that the reason I thought of him, I'm inviting him, was that when I was asked to give a speech on the opening day, in the very official opening day, where the Estonian minister, cultural minister, and president were behind me standing, it came to my mind that, of course, we had the agreement that I allowed the exhibition to open and everything, but I still couldn't hold myself. What came to my mind was to say that I just feel that I didn't travel thousands of kilometers to another country to experience censorship again. That the last thing that I could imagine was that, because many of artists and writers and intellectuals decide to leave Iran, not because of the common illusion of better economic condition and these kind of stereotypical expectations, but it's just simply to be able to do what they want to do in the way they want to do and talk about things in the way they want to do. And so at that moment, it really comes to my mind to say that, that was my first thought, that I have to mention it, how being from Iran, what it means to me. And we had this conversation with you, Barbad, and I told you that's the reason I'm asking you, and you had also interesting point. I just have to mention that your voice is a bit unclear still with the bad things we have here. Maybe a bit closer to the microphone, it might help us.
Okay, well, it's a headset, so I wouldn't literally get closer to it if I move,
I didn't know.
It's like your krat, if I pronounce it correctly. It's an assemblage of members. So no, anyhow, yes, it's well, comparing them and what is at stake usually with freedom fighters that come from countries like this. I wouldn't call it Iran. Iran has another history, of course. The Islamic Republic, Islamic State, as I call it. ISIS was Islamic State, still is. Taliban is an Islamic State. the Iranian regime is an Islamic state. Okay, so what is at stake here is that people usually compare. That they say that, okay, so I have to choose between imperialism and the Islamic Republic. There's no third pill, like in Matrix, that's just BS. It's not like that. You have to fight censorship whenever you find it, wherever you find it. And why I mentioned Patrice Lumumba, my first words, was because it was in 1960 or 1961. So I'm not talking about Middle Ages, right? I'm not talking about the Golden Age, the Dutch Golden Age and all that. 1961. It was in 1961 that the French drowned Algerians and anarchists in the Seine, in Saint Michel Bridge, near Saint Michel Bridge, and so and it's just more than something more than a year ago that Salman Rushdie was assassinated, in a failed attempt, of course, who lost an eye and came back like Odin. But anyhow, the whole message, I would say, as an Iranian who never chose to live abroad, who never chose to leave his country, was forced to not to go back, was threatened, his life was threatened. So it's that, lest we forget, when I see that the right wings nearly all across Europe are gaining power. Fascists in Italy. I was recently in Italy, and I was thinking that I think you wouldn't find any Italian who hasn't seen the film Dolce Vita, right? But still, fascists can gain power. So, is there a German that doesn't know about the Nazis? I don't think so. And they're not Holocaust deniers. They just think that it's a good thing. What is happening in Gaza, for instance? We're talking about censorship, okay? There's Piers Morgan. There's Piers Morgan who talks, his program is called Uncensored. So, let alone the fact that it's what reveals itself conceals something behind it, that's saying that many things are censored. Okay, my program is uncensored. So every single human being has to start with condemning Hamas, then talk about the whole process. It's and you would never ask the same thing from many other human beings. So, and I can give you numbers about the anti-Semites in Germany, that the most of them are actually Jews, and the population of Jews in Germany is 1%. Most of those that are condemned with anti-Semitism are actually Jews. And so those Jews are seen as self-hating Jews, and so you are either a Holocaust denier or blah 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 blah. So the whole message would be, lest we forget, it's not that there are countries like Iran, like Afghanistan, that people are killed because of what they say. They just a few months ago they stabbed one of the most important Iranian filmmakers with his wife, who was also a scriptwriter and also a set designer, I believe. And so they stabbed them to death. Okay, so it's not like that. A phase has passed and these things would never come back. So if the images of other genocides from decades ago were in black and white, now they are in HD and you can watch them live. So lest we forget, that this is a kind of censorship. If you want to change, yeah, in Iran, the Ministry of Islamic Guidance does not call it censor; they call it momayezi, which means telling the difference between good and bad. Okay, that easy. They no longer call it like the Ministry of Propaganda, like Goebbels in the Nazi era. So, but lest we forget, if we stop fighting, things would go back to that era easily, because fascists are populists. They have the father figure always, and people lack that. It's some sort of a psychological thing. I don't know, but it's an everyday battle. So I think being an Iranian would just give you more, let's say, courage to do it. You don't travel. Uh, it's not. It's not like that. You can cut and paste yourself somewhere else. It comes with you. So and when such things happen, I really think that when such things happen to me in Europe, for instance, I've been censored in Sweden, in Belgium, So I think, oh fuck, it feels like home. I like that. That this is something that I understand. This is something that I can digest. This is something that I can fight for. That's why I followed Ehsan's arrows in Venice Biennale, and I didn't go to. I went to the U.S. pavilion. There was an overthrown tank. Ehsan, you remember? So that's turned to a treadmill, and so I didn't go inside really. But so this is it. The fight goes on, and lest we forget, it can come back any day, any day. It's knocking on our doors, actually.
Well, there was a lot there. Yeah, I mean, I guess that yeah, I wanted to pick up on something you said, but there was like also a lot, and I forgot my pen. So, but yeah, I guess one thing is, yeah, you mentioned the situation in Germany. People are not being killed there, and yet it's still something really terrible that has to be fought against, because actually right now, the kind of truth of censoring people for specific political reasons is coming out simply because those people were already invited. No, but in the future, we're not going to know who was censored because they're simply not going to be invited. So this, again, you're getting into the kind of strategy of obscuring censorship by simply not mentioning it, by not confronting it, and by simply avoiding the situation altogether, even though it's always in the background. So what do you think about that?
In the background, well, I call that well, the context. And I don't think it's in the background. I mean, I was shocked when, for instance, pro-Palestine demonstrations were banned in France for a month, and so in Germany, these fascists that are taking power, for instance, it's not in the background. They are gaining numbers. I mean, in France, Le Pen was once a danger, the daughter and the father before her, and but now there are worse people. I mean, so it's I think it's there's this very stupid idea of history going forward, which I think is rather childish, because history was never like this. It doesn't go forward. It has its ups and downs, and we are nowadays. I think we are in one of his worst moments. Let's say. I mean, seeing a genocide like this and things that are happening all around us. I mean, when it comes to the climate change and those who deny it, the Republicans were said, I'm suspicious about climate. Who the fuck are you to be suspicious about something scientific that you have no idea about? So they are skeptical about the climate change, and still people are, and so if you see it from above, like a pigeon or like an eagle or something like that, that's why I like Boris Groys very much. Is not a he's like a eagle. He's like a seagull, let's say, that sees things from above. I think we are in one of its lowest points. I mean, of our contemporary history, and I think we have to fight. But I believe that we will lose eventually. What I see is that I see no hope, I have no hope in a better world. I mean, in a near future. But I think we still have to fight, because I mean, people like us, we were born to it. We were born. I mean, Bita, Ehsan, and I, we were born in the longest war of the 20th century that took 8 years between Iran and Iraq. Um, we understand such things a bit better than our confrères and consoeurs in let's say in Europe or or elsewhere. But it breaks one's heart when still people, in for instance, George W. Bush Jr. was called leader of the free world. Leader of the free world is something that, it's like Game of Thrones or something. It's what happened to all that philosophy, what happened to all those theories, what happened to enlightenment, what happened to all. I mean, it's going worstward, to borrow Samuel Beckett's words. It's going worstward, and I hate when people keep quoting him, fail again, fail better. They don't even know that it's part of a story, part of fiction called worstward. It's someone who's tired of trying, but has no other option than doing so. There's no hope, but there's no other option. This is how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the time, it's we've used the whole 2 hours, so we can open to questions. I still have a lot of questions, but I think that I can ask you first as a priority, or else I'll ask mine. And I mean, I have a question that I think because we didn't get so into it, and I was wanted to get more so both for Lieneke and Ehsan, because of course it's as Barbad you were saying, it's not a comparable situation. They're very kind of extreme moments, but also this kind of down curve, right? Which I think we see globally. I really don't see something going up realistically. So one thing that struck me in the images actually is how much I see a similarity, to the way the landscape is constructed in the Netherlands. And this has a lot to do with a kind of a shared ecological landscape of global destruction, what you were mentioning with the ecological disaster, but also the rise of right-wing politics. So I had wanted to ask you, Ehsan, about actually now the most recent election in the Netherlands, and because it has to do first with the ecology, but also it has a lot of impact on possibilities for immigrant artists and for, well, anyone coming here from abroad in general. I don't know who wants to start.
What's the question?
Yeah, the question, maybe if you could contextualize a bit, because when I see the images and I encourage everyone to look up close, I really see like the way that the landscape's being manipulated, it's really, really.
Monoculture in the Netherlands on farm landscape, it's like, I think, back then, it was like the start of inventing monoculture and to experiment with that in the Dutch Indies, and now you see it like in the whole farm landscape in the Netherlands. It's like, and the BBB, so I think the farmer party in the Netherlands is also like elected. They not that much as they thought maybe, or they hoped, but they are not power now. So that's connected to the whole work.
But then this idea, no, that like one local culture can be kind of exported into these colonies to produce a kind of economical system.
Yeah. And also the way back, so they learned how to do it over there, and then also in the Netherlands you see that there aren't not so many trees anymore, for instance.
Yeah, and so it began there.
Yeah, and because in the Netherlands it started like in the 80s, so that's I mean like 30 or 40 years ago. That the landscape is like this, so it's also
Because like before that you didn't need to cut your own wood. Before that you didn't need to use your own land and cut your own wood. You had
exactly
land somewhere
with
free labor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I also wanted to mention that last last year at ITFA, there was this really good documentary, Selling the Colonial War. I don't know if someone saw it, but it's also a lot about censorship and like how the Dutch government reacted on the Dutch Indies for the last 50 and 60, 50 years. So that's also a really interesting documentary about that. That's also all about Erasure and not telling the whole story. It's from Insum Adstaken. That's the director. Okay.
Now, talking about ITFA, I wanted to mention something we were talking about yesterday, like these different ways of censorship that is not considered as censorship in the classical way of like removing an artwork. What happened at ITFA, it was that, so ITFA didn't publish any statement before the opening of the festival about what is happening in Gaza. So this provoked a reaction. People were on the stage with a banner at the opening saying from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free. And then the others from the balcony, they were shouting, free Gaza, ceasefire. And the director actually, because it was a crazy moment, because some people were clapping, some people were booing the demonstrators. And in that moment of clapping and booing, the director clapped as well. And that the next day ended up in the right-wing website saying, look what we are actually sponsoring, because it was like the culture folks in the background. And it was like, okay, is this where our money goes? And the director, who is Syrian, is clapping for these demonstrators, for this anti-Semite slogan, which is interesting because this slogan is not considered anti-Semite by the higher court of Netherlands. So actually you can use this slogan, it's not offensive to anyone. So then the response of ITFA is that we are not standing behind this slogan. This is not the slogan we want to use. So basically throwing most of the Palestinian artists who are working under the bus, literally.
And also the activists.
Not literally, but
also the activists in the room.
yes. So then the response is that the Palestinian Film Institute that is participating with 2 films there will be a screen, and two films on the development programs decided that they cannot find a safe space, even they cannot accept contributing to such festival. So what happens? They withdraw and call this a kind of an indirect censorship.
Yeah, I kind of see this, also what's happening now. I mean, this project was originally about this historical erasure or attention that doesn't look at the context behind. It became something actual, and then kind of 1 year later, you're already in the situation where it's everywhere. So in a way, Bita, you were ahead of your time.
But then it was interesting to finish the story, because then they granted one of the Palestinian director who didn't pull out his film as the best director.
First, wow.
And the classical thing is that during these evenings, when like the artists and the directors and the staff, everyone meets in the bar and the cafes, I had conversation with some of the staff that they were just crying, saying, how did they imagine if not being in solidarity with Palestinians? So they assume that they are on the right side of the history, let's say, by just being silent, which is very problematic. Like, we are good by default, so we don't need to say where we stand, because we are giving so much platform to the Palestinian artists.
That's a really interesting assumption about culture in general. You know, that culture is good and culture is ethical, and that it shouldn't be questioned that it's that way.
That's a very good one. Yeah, that's very good.
All right, well, I think maybe we can have some drinks, because 2 hours actually I flew by. So yes, thank you. We can continue the conversation in a more in a smaller circle. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So once again, Bita, the work is magnificent. I wish I had, if I had the chance to see the complete monster for myself, you know, and so just drop 3 drops of your blood into the glass, so we would see that if we can create that kraut, if you pronounce it kraut. It's good, yeah. It's yeah, we have that. We have some, you know, because genes, the jinn, in the Islamic tradition, I wouldn't really elaborate more, but so no one ever thought that when they give you things like money, trees, houses, you're actually taking it from someone else. You know, that they so the amount of these trees, the amount of this wealth is finite. They don't create it out of nowhere, out of nothing. So you have to always take it from somewhere else and put it there. And that's the core idea of such productions. And I think you've realized it with your work, and the censorship showed that you were standing on the right ground, because the idea of being politically correct it's a very manipulated idea. And Edward Said said it like decades ago, that you can talk about being politically correct, but many things are not correct about it. You can no longer say nigger, but you can say anything about any Arab, or you know, about you can say Paki, but you cannot say.
Difficult for us to hear you, because there is surrounding sound, and there is a lot of echo.
No one. There's no sound here. So I would just kiss you goodbye, guys. Take care.